Hello and welcome everyone. I'm Claudia Rizzini. I'm the Executive Director of the Radcliffe Fellowship Program at Harvard University. It is my pleasure to introduce the first lecture of our series of Fellows Public Talks this year. Our speaker today is Rich Benjamin, our Walter Jackson Bade Fellow. 2 years, 27,000 miles, from the greens of Country Club in St. George, Utah, to the gun clubs and white supremacist compounds in North Idaho. Rich immersed himself in the fastest growing white majority counties in the nation. As a cultural anthropologist and public intellectual, Rich embarked on this journey to understand the influx of white migrants in these communities he dubbed Whitopias. In his first book, Searching for Whitopia, Rich details the deeply entrenched racism that exists both on an unconscious and conscious level and preserves residential segregation. During his year at Radcliffe, Rich will work on a memoir that illuminates the intimate impact of public politics on private lives. More broadly, this work is a contribution to discussions surrounding forced migration, displacement, and belonging in America amidst renewed waves of racism and xenophobia. Through his written works and public broadcast, it is Rich's hope that audiences cultivate a more critical and outraged lens when thinking about events as they unfold in the political and social sphere. I'm thrilled to welcome to the podium our first speakers this year, Rich Benjamin.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. And good morning on Zoom. I'm so thrilled to be here. Before beginning, I just want to thank Harvard. I want to thank the Harvard Radcliffe Institute. And I want to thank you, Claudia, and everyone at Harvard Radcliffe Institute staff. I've only been here a little over a week, and yet I still feel welcome and productive. And in some days, I'd rather feel productive than welcome. So I'm grateful to that. And I want to thank you guys in the audience. I want to thank my fellow fellows. I'm really looking forward to this year. And I just want to thank you guys for being open and for all the work you do, which inspires my own. And I should say, I stand between you guys and lunch. So I'll try and be concise. And for those of you who might be eating as you watch, I hope what I have to say is food for thought and not cause for indigestion. I have a story to tell. The story takes place mostly in Haiti. So as a barometer, I'm curious how many of you have been to Haiti physically? Keep your hands up, please. Okay, interesting barometer. So the story I have to tell begins in Haiti. It begins in 2009. I had just published my first book. I was in that space where I was thinking about what to write next. I worked in a think tank based in New York City, and I was leaving my office one day. I saw the flat screen TV, and an earthquake had stricken Haiti. It was the worst earthquake in the Western Hemisphere. 300,000 helpless people had died. That alone is its own bad tragedy. But I couldn't help but wonder. This image of the presidential palace in Port-au-Prince kept flashing and flashing and flashing across the screen. And this piqued a sort of curiosity in me. What is going on here? One of the most vexed occupants of this presidential palace was a guy called Daniel Fignolé, who was briefly president of Haiti in 1957, before he was deposed. He was a controversial figure, and in a way, one of the most underwritten presidents in Haiti. Fignolé's journey began in a small fishing port town called Pestel. He was born into such poverty that 4 of his siblings died during childbirth because of malnutrition and poverty. When he was 14, his own father collapsed dead from a heart attack, so he was shipped to Port-au-Prince, and he made this journey from Pestel to Port-au-Prince, and he arrived at the age of 14 wearing nothing, basically, but his tattered clothes and the stigma of the provinces. Right about when Fignolé was born, America occupied Haiti. Wilson sent US Marines to Haiti, and the stated reason was that he wanted to prevent Germany a staging ground as World War I heated up near America's coasts, just 600 miles from Florida. But the real reason is that banking executives, railroad executives, and financial interests said, we have interests in Haiti, there's instability, you need to watch out what's going on. And so it was. When the US Marines arrived in Haiti, they kind of preserved this racialized colorism, this racialized caste system that put light-skinned people at the top. And they installed a puppet mulatto president. And in the gendarmerie, which you see pictured here, and almost in every aspect of business and the military and in law, this caste system was preserved. When the US Marines set foot in Haiti, they might have been from the gambling dens of New Jersey, they might have been from the rolling hills of Iowa, or from the flat prairie lands, but they did share one thing in common. They were all white, as the US military was segregated at that time. When they arrived in Haiti, they basically imposed an import on all Haiti's cocoa, all Haiti's bananas, all Haiti's mahogany that was shipped. And this import went to US interests for their own private good and for America's private good. They instituted a tax system. They took over Haiti's finances. And there's a fascinating New York Times article where a bank that would later become Citigroup, but was a Wall Street bank at the time, they carted $500,000 of gold, shipped it to New York for safekeeping. That was a lot of the military and the financial tenor of the occupation. One of the military leaders in charge of the occupation was a man called Waller, and he himself was the grandson of rich Virginia slaveholders. So one imagines the military leadership in Haiti, and even some of the soldiers coming from the context of America, and then meeting the context of Haiti. Even the New York Times talked about the wanton killing of Haitians at that time. Here we see a news article. When the Marines came, they reinstituted a system called corvée. And what this meant is they could conscript a Haitian, and if that Haitian couldn't afford the tax that they imposed, they could rope that Haitian up to do a lot of the work of the road building and the infrastructure building required of the occupation. And there's a fascinating account of an American Baptist minister in Haiti, one day waking up on a Sunday morning only to find members of his Haitian congregant roped up cruelly like slaves in the system of corvée. And so both for American soldiers and for Haitian nationals, it was very redolent of slavery, which would have been just 2 generations before. Enter Daniel Fignolé and a guy called François Papadoc Duvalier. They met sometime in the early 1930s. I'm not quite sure when. Most historians are not quite sure when. And they shared a lot in common. They were dark-skinned boys who grew up under occupation. They were both good students. He studied medicine. Daniel studied math and economics. And they saw their relatives humiliated under this system of white boy soldiers. And having grown up in dire poverty, They just wanted a toehold into comfort and the gentle black bourgeoisie. And so they became friends. I spoke a little bit about the racial tenor of the occupation. I want to speak about the economic tenor of the occupation. And as you listen to the clip I'm about to show, listen for the words labor and wages. That's how I'd like to cue your ear.
To help enforce American rule, the Marines created a 2,400-man national police force of Haitians led by 100 white American officers. A primary American mission was road building. The deplorable conditions of roads in the rural areas presented a problem for American development and control. To obtain work crews, the Marines conscripted local men. They were supposed to be fed, paid, and only made to work near their homes, but Marine officers frequently ignored these conditions and rounded up men to work as slave labor. Admiral William Caperton, pictured, was the commander of the American military force. He later wrote an essay about the goal of this conquest. Quote, "Thousands of Haitian peasants would be happy to work in sugarcane and cotton fields for 20 cents a day. The time will surely come when once more the famed production of the ancient French colonial Saint Domingue will return." The admiral continued, quote, "The great Artibonite plain in the north, which 150 years ago was crowded with the most productive plantations in the world, is now practically devoid of production except for immediate home consumption. One cannot believe that with the proved fertility of this soil, its great possibilities, and the presence of a dense population of laborers, which will be glad to work at unheard of low wages, it is certain sometime in the future to make this great Artibonite plain one of the most flourishing gardens of the world."
Here we have Daniel Fignolé pictured in 1946. And what he did in Haitian history and what he did for the country was to combine two things. One is Noirism and the other is socialism. Now, of course, through the Negritude movement, from Dakar to Paris to Chicago to Harlem, there's already a Negritude movement, there's already people speaking of Noirism. Of course, in socialism, from Paris to Bogota to Barcelona, and especially we see Franco in Spain in the Spanish Civil War, of course, people are already talking about socialism. But he is the person to unite these two together, Noirism and socialism. And more importantly, he's the person to operationalize this in a concrete economic, political, economical way. How does he do this? He starts a journal called Chantier, which is the workyards. And here we have a quote from the workyards. And I just wish to highlight the words, voices, racial solidarity, and the past. That's from his 1942 journal, Chantier. And as I said, Daniel Fignolé starts a labor party called MOP, and this is part of his cutting Haitian sense of humor. In other words, English had crept into Haiti because of the occupation, and he says, I'm gonna mop up the corrupt elitist politics. I'm gonna mop up labor exploitation, and MOP is the acronym for the Mouvement des Ouvriers et des Paysans, which is the movement of workers and peasants. And at the height, MOP is controlling 29 unions. This would be factory workers, this would be barbers, this would be janitors, this would be domestics and maids. All of these working class folks are part of this union. And I should say that I highlighted the word voice is he's able to do this through his voice. He's an extraordinary hypnotic speaker. He speaks in French, but he also speaks in Creole, which was unconventional at the time. He spoke in the African kind of proverbs and color that decorate Creole language. And he could speak to the people in a fast-paced way that they could understand. And he liked to take his voice to send it into a professorial timbre then pop it into a squeal. And so, as a practical matter, what he does is, through HASCO, which stands for the Haitian American Sugar Company, he institutes a strike, which gets them a 5-day work week, gets them the weekends off, it gets them a pay raise. And then Standard Oil had a refinery in Haiti. He helps them to strike. And then the Bate shoe factory, which is an international multinational corporation, he strikes. That's an image of the refinery in Port-au-Prince at the time. We're thinking about labor, socialism, and we're also thinking about race, a form of racial capitalism. I wish now to speak a little bit about his personal life. So, Fignolé married a woman called Carmen Jean-François, and she came from the black upper middle class in Jacmel. And she was a generous, kind, loving person, where he was an ordinary kind of irascible ass, okay? And they married. And her folks planted coffee, and her parents had this knack for buying up property, fixing it up good, and then renting it at a tidy profit. And so her mother, who he hated, which would have been his mother-in-law, she was what they called a commerçante. She was one of these women who, if you gave her a gold, she could turn it into two. And so they married, and what he never really acknowledged is that it was her money that bankrolled his career. It was her money that allowed him to establish the labor journals, concentrate full-time on his party, and run for office in and out. So that's the type of couple they were. And examples of her generosity is she was the type of person she entertained. She kind of decorated his public profile. So she remembered your birthday, she remembered your kid's birthday, she remembered your kid's christening, she remembered what you wore at your kid's christening. When you were feeling sick, when you were feeling blue, she'd take and make a nice pot of Haitian stew, she'd tie it up into a cloth and send it to you with her chauffeur with a touching note. This couple, they lived near the Duvaliers, and they became friends. In fact, the Duvaliers were, François Duvalier was the godfather of their oldest child. The Fignolés, the Duvaliers. The Fignolés, the Duvaliers. Friends in Port-au-Prince, kind of getting a toehold in the black middle class, also deeply interested in Noirism and in the politics of the country. Then came a crisis election, 1957, which pitted a rich mulatto industrialist, and the other two big contenders were Francois and Daniel. And they fought in this election. It was a contested election. They campaigned across the country. And ultimately, Daniel bested it, and he became president of Haiti.
For a few days, the island republic of Haiti seems to rush toward civil war and complete chaos. As rival army factions fight for control of the West Indies nation, mobs riot in the streets of Port-au-Prince. Such a time is made to order for looters. And private property finds little protection. But out of the confusion emerges a provisional president, Daniel Fignolé. He bravely picks a cabinet. For how long is a question mark.
A newsreel. So crowds estimated on the order of 10,000 people flood the streets of Port-au-Prince. They go to the National Palace. True to his character, Fignolé flings open the doors and people celebrate on the portico and the lawn of the National Palace with him. Here he is with his wife, Carmen, photographed by Life magazine, the day of their inauguration. More crowds flood the street to celebrate, and he's inaugurated. The very morning after his inauguration, Dwight David Eisenhower arrives to the Oval Office at precisely 8:03 a.m. At 9 a.m. precisely, he begins a cabinet meeting in his national security office. In descending order of importance of the men in that room, we have Alan Foster Dulles, his Secretary of State. We have Charles Wilson, his Secretary of Defense. We have Alan Dulles, the head of the CIA. We have Andrew Goodpaster, his national security advisor. And we have Vice President Richard Nixon. Haiti is the very first item on the agenda. They meet. Eisenhower is briefed on the Haiti situation. Daniel Fignolé is called a rabble-rouser. They concede he's not quite a communist, but he's hostile to US interests. The only decision taken during this meeting is to not recognize Fignolé's government. It should be said that Alan Foster Dulles and Alan Dulles are brothers, and they would not have been unfamiliar to the occupation of Haiti, since their maternal uncle, i.e. their mother's brother, had been Secretary of State when Wilson invaded Haiti. So 2 weeks into his presidency, 19 days to be exact, Daniel Fignolé assembled his cabinet. They heard footsteps coming. The cabinet door was burst open. Soldiers flooded the cabinet room, and he was kidnapped at gunpoint. His cabinet was carted off and put in prison. Thus began the coup. 43 more soldiers were sent to his private home. They came banging on the door. They kidnapped his wife, Carmen. They took her away. And ultimately, him and Carmen were forced at the butt of a rifle onto a plane, which took them to America. Once Carmen had been taken, about 8 hours later, more soldiers returned to their home. And they took Fignolé's 8 children. They kidnapped those children. They took them to the basement of this building, which is the Dessalines Barracks, the Army garrison, and they kept those children hostage in the basement of those barracks for 10 days, and the children were assaulted. Their aunt Gigine, the woman you see pictured here, managed to find the children. She managed to wrest them free. She managed, under martial law, because martial law was imposed by the military, she managed to secret them across the border to the Dominican Republic. And she managed to get them on a flight to reunite them with their parents in New York. As if to recoup their solidarity, as if to recoup their pride, as if to recoup their dignity, she put them in matching white outfits. So this woman here is my mother. That's Danielle. And this is part of the personal aspect of the book project. Family portrait. Normally that implies pride, cheer, rootedness. But this portrait captures my family in harrowing flight. I have always had a garrulous, extroverted mother who never talked about her past. For years, I sensed an intense grief in my mother that kept us from connecting in a deep and real way. Her aversion to address that agony and my inability to ask about it corroded our relationship. For most of my life, I didn't know the circumstances of my mother's upbringing. I hadn't heard about the violence she'd suffered. Where my tight-lipped, taciturn mother wouldn't talk about her past, my scholarly instincts kicked in, and I decided to find her life in the archive. And so I went to the National Security Archive. I was expecting maybe I'd find a pamphlet about Fignolé's past, maybe I'd find a pamphlet about his transition to America, but instead I luckily hit a gold mine, and I found 300 pages of material whereby operatives in Port-au-Prince had been spying on his activities. Among these 300 pages of documents, 4 remained redacted all these years later. I filed an appeal to have these documents unredacted. That was denied. I filed another appeal to have these documents unredacted. That was denied. I filed a third appeal to have these documents unredacted. That was denied. So then I did what any good American would do. I sued. I sued the State Department, and I lost that suit. And the person in charge of losing that suit was a judge called Amy Berman Jackson. She's an Obama appointee. She's the judge responsible for putting Roger Stone in prison during the Trump years. And so I lost that suit. I have a lot of archival sources writing this book. The National Security Archives, Eisenhower Presidential Library, the Dulles Papers, which are at Princeton, the Brothers Dulles Papers, the New York Public Library, and then I'm continuing here at Harvard to see what I can find in these archival sources. I also went to the Haiti archives after the earthquake, and imagine my distress. I was hoping maybe I'd find my grandfather's typewriter. Maybe I'd find original copies of his Union speeches, but none of it. Haiti's archive had been destroyed in the earthquake. I have to admit, I'm one of these people who loves the archives. I love to don the gloves. I love to deal with the material. I love everything about the process and the physicality of being in the archive. And yet I have a complicated relationship to the archive. As I said, I'm grateful to be here among you fellows, and I realize the extent to which the archive is exposed in many of your books. Here we have Rebecca Donner's book, All the Frequent Trouble of Our Days. And for me, I just love the way she does a recovery story going to the Federal Archives in Berlin to speak about the resistance of Germany. The resistance period against Hitler. And in many of these pages, what I love is, even when Donner isn't explicitly talking about the archive, there's this imbrication of the archive as both substance and as method. And then we have Saidiya Hartman's Wayward Lives. And for me, in the work I do, this book really takes race, it takes social science, it puts them in a dialectical relationship. How is race impacting social science? How is social science impacting race? And specifically, where is the archive in this dynamic, in the many places of this dynamic? We think about the mess of the archive. It's interesting to consider that archive etymologically comes from the public record. Archean means to lead, to govern, to rule. Archean is the house of the ruler, when one thinks the way that the archive can have the imprimatur of the state. Archive is a kind of dream. If you think of the architecture of the mind, especially as we see in psychoanalysis, Freud, ego, superego, id, conscious, unconscious, what are the metaphors, what are the analogies we could draw between the architecture of the archive and the architecture of the mind? We have archive fever, the way one can luxuriate in archive fever, the way one can suffer in archive fever. As Derrida says, on un mal d'archive, what it means to suffer from archive fever. And even in the psychoanalytical tradition, when we think of feminists who update this tradition, like Kristeva, what does she, or what might she say about a feminist analysis of the archive? The mess of the archive. So this is the methodology of this project I'm here to do at Harvard, is archival research, interviews with Fignolé's associates, once classified US cables, Haitian historical records, photographs, news reports, Fignolé's books, essays, radio broadcasts, his private letters, his correspondence among global public figures. I want to incorporate all of this into this book that I'm writing here. Because this book is both personal and public, I'm trying to kind of outline the contributions I'm hoping it to make. One is to document definitively the US government's role in deposing its foreign leader, Fignolé, because you have magazines like Jacobin, you have The Nation, and they kind of allege that this leader was deposed, but I hope to do this decisively through the record. The second is to show how the US's collusion in the 1957 coup provoked an historical era of conflict and political change in Haiti, from which Haiti has still never recovered. The third is to illustrate 1957 as a critical linchpin of change in the US's relationship to Haiti, shifting from an explicit colonial ruler to a nuanced neoliberal older sibling, acting in the US best interests under the guise of quote-unquote humanitarianism. And then I just want to use narrative as an entry point for analysis of democracy and democratic crisis in Haiti. So I say this within my own personal narrative. As I said, when the story began, I worked at a think tank called Demos, which was deeply interested in US democracy. How do we enfranchise Americans in the voting process, in civic life, as best we could, in an increasing multiracial democracy? But also, how do we expand the middle class, and how do we enfranchise people in a changing economy, democracy and economy? And at that time, 2009 through 2013, we made this calculation that it was worth going on to Fox News because a 15% of that audience was reasonable and persuadable. That calculation is obviously not true anymore. But we did that at that time. So we would talk about the fight for 15, the campaign to increase the minimum wage to $15. We talked about the movement for Black Lives. We talked about all the things policy-wise one can do to increase the middle class. And so I could always feel, I could sense, what my presence had done by the email I received. If I received a certain type of mail, I knew I had gotten under the folks' skin. And regularly, I would receive emails, commie, nigger, fag, commie, nigger, fag, commie, nigger, fag. And I could kind of dismiss this, right, and sleep like a lamb, because it was just people trolling. But the exercise at that time was important. And we see reverberations between Eisenhower's America and an emergent Trumpism. So beginning to conclude, another part of this project is to kind of make this analysis and this narrative between a democratic crisis in this country and a democratic crisis in Haiti. And obviously they're not the same, but still to kind of grapple with this. Here in our country, the democratic crisis involves electoral and policy domination by moneyed elites. It involves partisan gerrymandering. It involves race and age-based voter suppression. It involves rampant disinformation. And then there's civil servants who are undermined in this country. And of course, January 6th. We have a different tenor of democratic crisis in Haiti. Weak institutions, foreign influence, corruption. When Jovenel Moise was assassinated Venezuela had donated $2 billion to Haiti, which still hasn't been properly accounted for. We have the damage of its infrastructure by both national and human-made disaster. We have human rights abuses. We have paralyzed state. We have its election administration. And then we have extreme violence. I want to conclude by giving a flavor of the writing and the actual project as I begin to write the introduction and hope to make sense of all this material. When secrets envelop a family, when they're part of the air that you breathe, there's never just one of them. Secrets feed each other, secrets multiply, secrets compound. The secrets of this story are historical, public, personal, some so unspeakable that they push secrecy itself further into the closet. Scholar, grandson, son, I'm left to make sense of the damage that secrets cause. At the intimate level, secrets chip away the relationship between parents and children. In fact, my book in progress, my work at Harvard, and I are consumed by the whole conundrum of being a child and being a parent, the spiritual hurt of absentee parents, the way that parents have complicated lives before having children, the parents one thinks one has, the parents one might wish to have had, and the way that family members go missing on each other, and the way, no matter how tightly a family thinks it is bonded by hardship, parents and children sometimes become more intimately known by strangers than by one another. And more, children don't know their parents' ordeals. At the public level, secrets shape power, accountability, visibility. My grandfather had one surviving brother. That brother's children, under Duvalier's regime, were cast into shadows. Every time that they saw a police or a tonton Macoute, they would turn the corner and hide. They wondered whether they would be arrested or even killed merely by being a relative of Daniel Fignolé. At the historical level, secrets shape democracy and secrets shape power. When Daniel was exiled and Duvalier took power, it became illegal in Haiti to print anything about Daniel. It became illegal to even speak my grandfather's name. So he himself became a secret and cast under shadow. Fignolé's disappearance from the historical record and historical narrative alliterates Haiti's chronic disappearance from Western consciousness. This project looks into what gets obscured, how history obscures the workings of multinational corporations, how history obscures the foreign policy that gets conducted. Any anti-democratic project, here or abroad, by definition, works to obscure. The term blowback first officially appeared in a then classified 1954 CIA report. Blowback refers to the unintended consequences suffered by everyday people from US government covert activity. My family in Haiti still cope with the legacy of CIA intervention and US gunboat diplomacy. Dim family photos, violent silences, hand-to-mouth poverty in Brooklyn, my mother's nightmares of her kidnapping. It's all blowback. I don't remember my grandfather. I never met him. The massive regret of my life is that I never got to have an intimate talk with him. If you could have a soul-tight conversation with a dead relative, what would you say? Talk to me. Thank you. Bloodiest?
Sit at the very end.
Oh, okay.
And this is just the first talk, right? Thank you.
Thank you.
What an ambitious project. So I just want to invite the audience on Zoom and here in the room to ask questions. We have a few, but we have time for more. Kind of an obvious question at this point, but have you been able to bring conversations back to your mother or siblings in ways that are healing at this time?
I'll repeat that question, please.
Have you been able to bring conversations back to your mother or siblings in ways that are healing? So how is it really, I guess I can translate it in the way I feel it, which is, have you been able to talk to your mother, and I guess how's the relationship going?
So,
or if she's still alive.
Oh, yes,
okay,
yeah, oh,
good.
very much so. Yeah, it's so people who write family memoir, people who write anything involved with history realize that it's a ongoing process that's not linear. So what happens one day could be different than the next. One moment people are in the mood to think about this. The next minute they're not, depending on the mood.
Mm-hmm.
When Jovenel Moïse, the Haitian president, was so violently assassinated, it kind of triggered a kind of something that brought back the 60 years ago of what it means to be, the subject of state violence. So the answer is yes, no, not always, sometimes, right? Depending on the time. Sometimes the answer is an unequivocal yes. Sometimes it's a no. But these go back and forth. And it's, like I said, it's impacted by the news cycle. It's impacted by family dynamics that are happening at the moment. But that is my hope. I hope it is healing. I mean, it's not my only hope, but it is a hope.
Right. This is a question about the documents that you have been so hard trying to get to. What is the nature of the redacted documents that you're still trying to get full access to? So, of course, being a detective, I'm trying to kind of speculate what I'm missing. Generally, when the US government withholds documents after all these years, and in theory, they're supposed to unredact documents after 50 years. But when they do so after longer than that, they claim it could be A, because there's nuclear or defense weaponry related secrets that are contained in the document. Not likely in this case. Haiti doesn't have a nuclear arsenal, so it's not that. It could be that the documents are obscuring some ongoing aspect of the foreign policy that is still relevant today. I doubt that's not the case. Or it could be that the documents are partly obscuring the name or identifying information of a CIA asset on the ground. And that asset is either living or that asset has an immediate family member, and supposedly unrevealing that name can do that person reputational harm. So who knows, but I'm kind of narrowing it down. Yep. And the next question asks if you can talk a bit more about the period that you're studying and how that impacts the history of Haiti from that time to now. How does that coup and the story that you've outlined for us impact the history of Haiti?
Yeah, I very much believe that history is still living today, and that Haiti hasn't recovered from 1957. Just as a point of clarification, so Fignolé was deposed, Papa Doc Duvalier became president. He was very quick and swift in kind of eliminating his enemies, and then once he died in 1971, his son, who was only 19 at the time, took power. And so all told, during both Duvalier's regimes, 50,000 people lost their life. But as well, the country was just decimated in terms of its infrastructure, in terms of its civil society, its civic society, kind of the rules and norms that help countries to grow. And this is, in my opinion, at a very tender juncture in its history that made a disastrous difference.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So as you imagine your project going forward, what will be the end results of this research, and what form do you hope it will take?
It's going to take the form of a book, and I'm grateful I'm writing the book for Pantheon Books.
Okay. So there is a question that is coming in about your mother and her brothers and sisters, the 8 children, as you call them. How were the nuns in the photos involved? Were there any repercussions to your great aunt for bringing your mother's siblings and your mother over here?
That's a brilliant question. Who thought of the nuns? So another division and dynamic I didn't talk about with Daniel and Carmen is that he was a devout atheist as a scholar. He had no patience for Catholicism. He had no patience for her church, and she was a devout Catholic, which meant from the time she was a little girl, she went to a Catholic boarding school, and where she could learn to play the piano, where she could learn to speak proper French, and the very nun you saw picture would have been her teacher as a young girl. And so Gigine knew that obviously she couldn't go to political actors to kind of rescue these children because she didn't know who to trust. But she knew that Carmen, who was so well liked, just generally, but especially even including among the nuns, she asked the nuns to intervene, mm-hmm. and the nuns helped them get out.
Yeah. The next question is about, let me read it out. How do you negotiate the shifting nature of your family members' memories and incorporate, I guess, them in the fluid nature of your memoirs of historical trauma in the book? So how do you negotiate the shifting nature of the family members' memories and the nature of the historical trauma and the history that you are trying to write in the book?
Well, I don't mean to beat a dead horse, but if you look at these two books, the way that's negotiated, it's a technique, it's a function of language. When you mobilize point of view, close third person, close second person, first person, this, you can manage to weave the intimate with the historical. Mm-hmm. So I've already talked about the methodology of how this is done, but in writing, it's skillful writing. Mm-hmm. When you navigate time, when you navigate country, when you navigate space, right? It's very careful deployment of language.
Right. Yep. So this is a question about your grandfather, Fignolé, and the question is, why do you think the Americans let him live? Does your family has a theory about why he wasn't, he was brought to America and he was let live in America, reunite with his family, and so?
The reason they didn't kill him on Haitian soil, I believe, is because they would have had to contend with a massive urban population which would have rioted, and they didn't want a martyr on Haitian soil. Already, when his followers and supporters found out that he had been exiled, they took to the streets in an event that's called Ténèbres, which is also underwritten about in the history. So even when they thought he had been exiled, they took to the streets, and the Haitian military came and they started assassinating people point blank. And historians estimate that around 3,000 people died. And that's just with his exile. Now, had he stayed, it might have been a different matter. So they just wanted to be done with him and just send him abroad. Mm-hmm. They didn't want, dead or alive, his physical person in the country.
Mm-hmm. Have you ever met your grandmother?
No.
No? Okay. The next question is about how does your work, the one that the current work, compare with your previous work about white supremacy and whiteopia?
God. That book felt like a labor of love. Like, it's anthropology, it's distant, it's analytical, it's scholarship. I loved writing that book. Boom, boom, boom. And it was just such a joyous process. And this book is so hard. It's taken me so long. It's a different beast. There's emotional considerations, there's family considerations, and so the writing of it is very different. But as a matter of content, what I like to research and think and write about is to take errors, phenomenon, or people who are in crisis and on the cusp of change.
There seems to be a lot of interest in how you're going to write this book. So let me read you this other question. How do you plan to present the intergenerational trauma that stems from martial law, especially in relation to your mother's silence?
It's something I'm still thinking about. I don't think I have an answer right now.
Right. There is actually a question about resources to do the kind of work you're doing. So this person is congratulating you for a searingly personal and sadly universal presentation. Is there a fund organization you could recommend to support your own and similar research?
Besides the Harvard Radcliffe Institute. Yeah.
Have you had any funding to do this kind of work so far besides the Radcliffe?
That's, as a concrete matter, I recommend people go to Poets and Writers website, which has a wonderful poetsandwriters.com. It has just a wonderful database of fellowships, grant opportunities, call for papers, as a concrete matter. But those of us in this room, that's our life work. We're constantly hustling for resources. In fact, the Guggenheim deadline's today. What are you guys doing here? Go do your Guggenheim applications. But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, this is a hard one. So do you think that the US will have any kind of reckoning with its interventionism in Latin America and in the Caribbean?
Not from what I've seen, no. No, I want to put this in a context. Jacopo Arbenz, who was deposed, and then the leader of Iran would have been deposed around this time. And in his second inaugural address, Eisenhower would just have won his second term in 1956. He was very explicit. He said, we are dealing with communism in the first world, and now we're going to deal with it in the second world, so that prosperity and freedom and all this stuff can prosper. So, yeah, no, the answer is no.
Yeah. And the next question is, what has your experience at the Institute been like, and what do you expect to get from Harvard in general and for the book?
It's been wonderful. Can you imagine complaining or going on strike from what we're offered here? So for me, as I said, I feel welcome, I feel productive here. That's been my experience here so far. And just meeting people who are just doing different work and like talking to them. I think that's good. And then Harvard, we'll see. I'm going to go to the archives. I'm going to go to the libraries. What's useful here is just like maps and social material. Get a better sense of Haiti at the time. Maybe I can get military reports, governor's reports, to build a different and fuller picture.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's get one more question. So the question is, when did you start this project, and what have you found, for example, facts, archival material along the way that has most shifted your focus?
So I began it in earnest, I would say a year or 18 months after the earthquake. Mm-hmm. Things that shifted my focus are what I found in the archive, the National Security Archive, then more importantly, the government's refusing to unredact that. And by the way, that's expensive and time consuming, like to sue this, because then you're kind of project managing a lawyer, you're finding that lawyer. It's, the work we do is hard, and people say, oh, why haven't you finished your book? Well, I'm suing to get some papers. So those are two elements that have changed the way I've found visiting Haiti. I found things that changed and enriched the research and took it in different directions. Mm-hmm. Going to the Dulles Brothers papers at Princeton, and maybe here at Harvard, there'll be another opening up of the research.
Right. Thank you, Rich. Thank you for your
guys.
presentations and for your questions.